You know what's strange? We live in a world obsessed with talking about generations. Boomers get blamed for the past. Millennials get mocked for struggling. Gen Z gets analyzed like some kind of social experiment happening in real time. But there's one generation that almost nobody talks about anymore. A generation that quietly disappeared into the background while holding everything together at the same time. Generation X. And honestly, that silence says everything about them. Because Gen X was raised in a world that forced people to grow up fast, stay quiet, and never expect anyone to save them. Imagine being 8 years old, walking into an empty house after school. No phone, no internet, no parent checking where you are every 5 minutes, just silence. You make your own food, you solve your own problems. You learn very quickly that if something goes wrong, nobody is magically coming to fix it for you. And that changes a person forever. I think a lot of people misunderstand Gen X because they mistake emotional distance for emotional weakness. But those are not the same thing. What looks like detachment is often survival. What looks like cynicism is usually disappointment repeated too many times. They watched marriages collapse, careers disappear overnight, promises break in real time. They learned early that stability can vanish without warning. And maybe that's why they became the generation that trusts competence more than words, privacy more than attention, silence more than performance. So if this video feels meaningful already, take a second to like the video and subscribe to support the channel. Because this is not just a story about a generation. It is a story about what happens when an entire group of people learns to survive quietly, while the world slowly forgets they were ever carrying it at all. And the deeper you look into Generation X, the more you realize their independence was never fully a choice. It was training, survival training disguised as childhood. I remember talking to someone from Gen X who said that by the age of 9, they already knew how to cook simple meals, stay home alone for hours, and solve problems without calling anyone for help. And honestly, that sounds almost unbelievable today. But for Gen X, that was normal life. Empty houses after school, silent afternoons, no constant supervision, no emotional check-ins. You figured things out because there was no other option. And over time, that creates a very specific kind of person. Calm under pressure, emotionally contained, hyper-independent. One major sign of this mindset is that they rarely expect rescue from other people. Even during difficult moments, their first instinct is usually, "I'll handle it myself," because deep down they learned that very early in life. And after enough years of carrying that independence alone, Generation X slowly developed another survival instinct, expecting disappointment before it arrives. They watched marriages fall apart, watched loyal workers lose jobs overnight, watched adults promise stability while the world kept changing underneath everyone's feet. I remember hearing a Gen Zer say they always keep their expectations slightly low because life taught them not to get too comfortable. And honestly, that mindset sounds sad until you understand where it came from. One major sign of this psychology is emotional guardedness. They hope for good outcomes, but part of them quietly prepares for loss at the same time, because experience trained them to never fully trust permanence. And if you recognize that feeling deeply, comment number 7 below. And after growing up in a world where independence became second nature, another pattern quietly formed inside Gen X. They learned to keep parts of themselves hidden. Not because they were ashamed, because privacy once meant safety. I remember someone from Gen X saying that when they embarrassed themselves as teenagers, maybe 5 people knew about it and life moved on. There were no screenshots, no viral moments, no strangers watching your mistakes forever. And that changes the way you see the world. Gen X became extremely careful about visibility. They do not feel the need to document every emotion, every meal, every thought online. In fact, one of the clearest signs of Gen X psychology is emotional privacy. They reveal themselves slowly, selectively, quietly, because deep down they still associate too much exposure with vulnerability. And maybe that emotional privacy is exactly why Gen X developed such a sharp sense of irony. Because when you grow up hearing adults talk casually about nuclear war, economic collapse, and a world that could fall apart at any moment, humor becomes emotional armor. I remember hearing a Gen Zer joke about serious problems with this strange calm expression, almost laughing before the pain had time to fully land. And honestly, younger generations sometimes misunderstand that. They think Gen X is emotionally detached. But many times, sarcasm is simply how they survived fear without falling apart internally. One of the clearest signs of this mindset is dark humor during stressful situations. They laugh first, deflect first, distance themselves emotionally before reality can hit too hard. And if you recognize that pattern in yourself, comment number 7 below, because that quiet emotional shielding is one of the most overlooked traits of Generation X psychology. And underneath that humor, another defining trait of Generation X quietly took shape: their relationship with work. Not performative work, not motivational post-work, real work. The kind that starts early and teaches you that nobody is coming to hand you stability. I remember hearing stories about Gen X teenagers waking up before sunrise for paper routes, then going to school exhausted like it was completely normal. They learned how to deal with difficult customers, broken machines, and real responsibility long before adulthood officially arrived. And because they watched companies lay people off without warning, they stopped trusting loyalty alone. One major sign of Gen X psychology is that they trust competence more than promises. They would rather quietly become indispensable than loudly seek recognition from other people. And maybe that is why Gen X relationships often look different from the outside. Because they rarely ask for help, yet somehow they are usually the first people to quietly show up when someone else is struggling. I remember a Gen Zer once driving 3 hours in the middle of the night just to help a friend whose car broke down, and then acting like it was no big deal afterward. No social media post. No need for praise, just action. That generation learned early that survival depended on reliable people, not emotional speeches. One major sign of this mindset is silent loyalty. They may not constantly express affection with words, but when life gets difficult, they are there. Quietly, consistently. And if that sounds like you, comment number 7 below. Because Gen X often loves people through responsibility more than attention. And that quiet loyalty also explains why Generation X has such a complicated relationship with authority. They do not automatically respect titles, they respect capability. Because they grew up watching adults, politicians, and institutions make massive mistakes while still pretending to have everything under control. I remember hearing a Gen Zer say, just because someone is in charge doesn't mean they know what they're doing. And honestly, that mindset shaped an entire generation. One major sign of Gen X psychology is that they quickly test people for competence, not charisma, not status, real skill. If you genuinely know what you are doing, they will trust you deeply. But if your confidence is fake, Gen X usually senses it almost immediately. And once you understand that distrust, their relationship with money suddenly makes a lot more sense. Generation X lived through too many economic shocks to ever fully relax. Layoffs, market crashes, recessions that wiped out years of progress almost overnight. I remember hearing someone from Gen X say they still keep backup savings even when life is going well, because part of them never stopped expecting something to fall apart unexpectedly. And honestly, that mindset never completely leaves you after enough instability. One major sign of Gen X psychology is financial hyper-preparation, multiple income streams, emergency plans, constant contingency thinking. Not because they are greedy, because experience taught them that security can disappear much faster than people realize. And that constant preparation also shaped the way Generation X learned to solve problems. Before the internet, answers were not instant. You had to search for them. I remember someone describing hours spent digging through library shelves just to understand one small problem, and somehow that effort made the knowledge feel more valuable. Gen X learned patience, trial and error, hands-on thinking. One major sign of this mindset is that they instinctively try fixing things themselves before asking for help, because they grew up believing that with enough time, focus, and persistence, almost anything could eventually be figured out. And maybe that is why Generation X feels so different from the world today. They may have been the last generation forced to sit alone with their own thoughts. No endless notifications. No instant entertainment. Just boredom, silence, and imagination. I remember hearing someone from Gen X say they used to stare out of car windows for hours simply thinking about life. And honestly, that kind of stillness barely exists anymore. One major sign of this mindset is comfort with solitude. They do not panic in silence, because silence was once a normal part of growing up. And maybe after hearing all of this, you are finally starting to understand something important about Generation X. They were never emotionless, never cold, never disconnected from the world. In many ways, they simply learned how to survive without constantly asking to be seen. They grew up between two completely different eras, one foot in the old world, one foot in the modern one. And that strange position shaped them into something rare, a generation that became strong quietly, capable quietly, hurt quietly. I remember talking to someone from Gen X who said, "We were taught to handle things ourselves because nobody was slowing down long enough to ask how we felt." And honestly, that sentence explains almost everything. Generation X became the bridge between worlds. Bridges do not ask for attention. They just carry weight every single day without collapsing. And maybe that is the most Gen X thing of all. So if this video made you see that generation differently, make sure you subscribe to the channel and support the next deep psychology videos. Because there are still so many hidden human patterns most people never stop long enough to truly understand. All the voices and images in my videos are created with AI. But the editing process is completely done by me. I personally match every image with the voiceover, arrange every scene, and turn everything into a complete video. No AI or machine can replace that part. Making videos takes a lot of time and effort, so if you enjoy the content, please support the channel with a like and subscribe.